here, I think it was 2016, right?
I believe so, yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we're in 2024. I mean, it's kind of silly to remind you, but
So
8 years later,
so
I mean,
we
why
have-
are we even talking about this case
because
now?
we have been taking a broad look over the past few months at increased violence in the West Bank. We have
Yeah.
seen a trend of increased violence in the West Bank, and that trend has accelerated after October 7th. And that's why you saw the department announce new visa restrictions or new visa restrictions of policy in December. And that's why you saw the president announce the new executive order in February. And so we are looking broadly at violence in the West Bank and taking accountability measures
Yeah, but
in
this
response.
is violence 8 years ago.
My point
Why
is,
don't you take accountability for what's happening now.
my point is
And
we are
individuals now.
we are taking. If you look at the other sanctions that we have rolled out over the past several months since the president's executive order, you have seen us impose sanctions for actions that have been taken in the past few months. So we are doing that.
Yeah.
We are looking broadly at violence we have seen in the West Bank, and where we believe accountability is appropriate, we're imposing it.
And you can't name the other individuals?
No, and the reason why, I know it's a little complicated, I often stand up here and say that we can't, visa records are confidential and we can't get into them. There is an exception under, for this first case. There, it just comes to do with the quirks of the law. Azaria was sanctioned under authorities we have under the State Appropriations Act. And under those authorities, we are allowed to name individuals' identity when we impose visa restrictions. The others, and that's for a finding of gross violation of human rights. The others on whom we've imposed visa restrictions, and this is true for the other dozens of individuals for whom we've imposed visa restrictions in the past few months, we are imposing those restrictions under the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the text of that law mandates that we keep the names confidential.
Can I just follow up on a timeline?
Ask Congress why it's written that way.
How far back are you guys going in this process in terms of looking at cases that could be considered to be subject to the EO or the new visa restriction policy that the Secretary laid out?
I don't think I want to get into that from here, other than to say, as I noted, we are looking at broadly at violence in the West Bank and actions that undermine the security and stability in the West Bank, and we will not hesitate to take additional measures. You've now seen, I think, a pretty steady tempo
You might go
of
back
visa
more than 8
restrictions.
years
I'm
and look at
not going to
cases?
give it time. You have seen a pretty steady tempo now over the past few months of financial sanctions and visa restrictions coming out of this department, and you should expect accountability measures to continue.
Can you just help us understand, though, the process a little bit more? Because it seems you rolled out some restrictions for action that's been taken in the last few months, and then there's this one of 8 years ago. I mean, it's a little bit confusing to understand what kind of process is being embarked on here.
Well, I'm not going to get into the full process, but as I just said in response to Leon's question, we are responding to the actions that we have seen in the West Bank and the very disturbing increase of violence in the West Bank. And so we are looking at those acts and looking at responses the government of Israel has taken, if any, in reaction to those acts, and then making determinations about whether additional measures are necessary on behalf of the United States.
And then just one last thing, you said that there hasn't been better accountability across the board when it comes to Israel. Is there any broader action that you guys would consider taking? I mean, if you find all of these violations have occurred, is it as meaningful to go after individuals? Perhaps like the IDF itself needs to be targeted?
So when it comes, first of all, I will say, when it comes to the impact of these sanctions, if you look at the complaints over the past few months from the individuals that have been sanctioned, if you look at the complaints from officials with the government of Israel, they certainly don't think these measures are effective because they have been quite loud in complaining about them and quite loud in
They do or they do not think?
They do. They do not think they haven't been. They think they've been ineffective. I probably got lost in a double negative there. If you just look at the time period since we have been imposing these measures, you have seen quite vociferous complaints from those who have been sanctioned, those who have had visa restrictions imposed on them, and from officials with the government of Israel. So they certainly seem to believe that these measures are effective. And I will note, part of the point of taking these measures is not just to impose accountability on people who have engaged in acts of violence or people who have engaged in other acts that increase instability in the West Bank. It is also to let others know that we are paying attention and we are watching and we are not going to hesitate to act.
any noticeable change in their action if they're so frustrated about all this?
So we have seen the government of Israel taking some steps to crack down on settler violence in the West Bank. We have seen them at times stopping settler violence and at times arresting those engaged in it. But those steps have not been sufficient, and so we continue to call on the government of Israel to take further steps.